Hey guys, I just wanted to pop in and give you a little bit of information about your poetry tracking project you're going to be doing. I've exposed you to Sylvia Plath and given you a solid collection of Plath's works. She is a very canonized author and one that does show up quite a bit on the AP test. So she's one that we definitely want to take a look at. So I'm going to run you through a sample of a project, which will be similar to what you're doing. This poem, as you can see from the cover, is Daddy by Sylvia Plath. Now, the first thing we're going to do is a textual history. We want to follow that text from the time it was written to where it is today in the canonized literature, whether it's in the classroom or library or on Amazon. And some poems, depending on the poem you pick, you may or may not be able to find when it was written or when it was published. So it's going to take a little bit of research on your part, but I think it's totally doable, especially with Plath. Start out by introducing your poem. Is it a sonnet, a villanelle? What kind of poem is it? This particular poem, Daddy, is 80 lines. It has 60 stanzas, has an irregular rhyme pattern with an emphasis on the oo sound. It was written in October 12th, 1962, approximately 4 months prior to author Sylvia Plath's death on February 11th, 1963. That's very specific. This particular poem was in a group of poems that Plath had left in her apartment ready for publication before she committed suicide. So it was very easy to track down and do the textual history on this particular poem. Throughout this course, when we study poems and poetry, you may not have as much luck. So that's just something to consider. But you can find a lot. Don't give up too easy when tracking a single piece. Getting Daddy published. This is just some information, some research. Again, Plath had passed away before this was ever published, so her ex-husband, well, he was actually her estranged husband. They were still married, which is why he got full dominion over her work. And it kind of goes through how he got it published. Very easy to research. Huge paper trail online. I looked at the differences between the British and the United States release. There were also differences in how Hughes arranged the poems. There were poems that were omitted. And then looking at it today and how it is in the marketplace. Okay, so new developments for Ariel. Ariel, when Ted Hughes passed away, the collection Ariel was then given to Frida, or Frida was gained rights to it, and she went through and restored it to Plath's original intention. She used the facsimile, which is all Plath's notes. It's kind of fascinating to look at and watch because you can absolutely see where she changed words to hit rhyme scheme or cross things out. I actually have a hard copy of the book in class if you're interested in perusing the book. It's pretty fascinating. And it takes a look at which poems did Hughes remove and omit and which poems he did not. So it's kind of interesting to see his thought process. He was actually living with his mistress and had, many affairs, and they were not in a good place at the time. So a lot of that came through in the writing, and it's interesting to see what poems he pulled out. I did an entire project in college just on the poems that have been removed. Daddy Makes the Big Screen. Track that poem. If it does show up in, say it's in a movie or any kind of pop culture references, it's very fascinating. This particular movie, I don't recommend. It's okay. It's pretty small. Some's factual, but it leaves out a lot. So it's an okay movie, but if you're a real true Sylvia Plath fan, which I hope you will be at the end of this unit, this is probably not going to be the best film to foster that. Okay, then you want to look at critical reception. We did a little bit of that when you looked at your short stories and how they were received. You want to be very focused on the publications where your poem showed up. What did people say at the time? And just go through. That's very easy to track online. Popularity is important at the time and right now, because we want to see why this poem is still being analyzed in high schools across the country. Why is it showing up in an AP test? What makes it special? What gives it that merit? Major criticism themes, looking at, and we've talked a little bit and touched on different type of critical theories: reader response, deconstruction theory. Also, we have feminist criticism, psychological criticism. Those are the two that are most applied to this particular piece, and typically Plath's works in general. Collected poems. So all those poems were put into another collection under Hughes' watch and actually received the Pulitzer Prize. So it's kind of interesting. Then we get into our authorial context. This is like our biography, understanding the author, understanding where they came from, how they're impacted. I looked at 1962 and all the world events that were going on around Plath at the time, and there was a lot of things. And it's very interesting if you look into that particular collection of poems and how they connect to what she was writing about. Plath was very socially conscious, and she was aware and had said in interviews, different political things bothered her, and it definitely comes up in her poetry. And then we just take a look at Plath the woman, what was her background, how was she brought up, information, how she lived, how she died, what could have impacted the work, her psychological history, the events leading up to the writing of Daddy was interesting. It was one of those poems that you really could track it closely because there's a historical record. However, depending on the poem you choose, you may not have as much information to draw on, but do the best you can. Dig in there, figure out where they were they living at the time it was written, who were they living with, what was their life like, get what tidbits you can, and then just some information on her death. Finally, works cited. Now, when you do your project, you will do a model of this project. You will select your own poem from the Plath collection. You want to make sure you choose a poem that you can really dig into. She does have some short poems and she does have longer poems. You don't want something that it's difficult to trace or track. So if you want to check with me, I'm pretty well versed on most of her work. So you're going to create some sort of multimodal presentation. It can be a video, it can be a PowerPoint, it can be slides, whatever you're comfortable with. And it's going to have to encompass that textual history, the just following that poem from cradle to grave and where it is today, the authorial context, looking at the author from a psychological perspective, their social and cultural background, as well as what was happening in their life surrounding the publication of that poem or the writing of that poem. And remember, writing when it was written and when it was published could be two very different things, so pay close attention to that. If you have any questions for me, send me an email. If you want some guidance on the poetry, please let me know. And I'm just going to give you your poems in the literature bank in modules. Pull that up. You can pick a poem that is not in that collection by Plath. I know the most about those poems. But if you go off on your own and find a Plath poem that just, really sparkles for you, feel free to get in touch with me and I can approve that for you. So, happy reading. Enjoy the Plath collection. Start thinking about which poem you want to do your project on. And once you are all set to go, click over to the assignment link for the Plath project, and it will have a rubric of everything you need to do and due dates. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.